Welcome to the Education and Empowerment Podcast. In this show, our hosts explore success and advancement through education by interviewing today's top leaders in the fields of education, business, and technology in order to provide insight into what it really takes to succeed. This show is brought to you by fourstay, a SaaS-enabled online booking marketplace for student and intern housing. fourstay provides turnkey, all-in-one, cloud-based accommodation software solutions for colleges, universities, and organizations. Learn more at offcampus.fourstay.com and landlords.fourstay.com. All right, let's get into the show.
You're tuned to Education and Empowerment Podcast. This is your host, Bakhtiyor Isoev. Today, I'm coming to you with an episode interview of Jonathan Alger, the president of James Madison University. Jonathan Alger became the sixth president of James Madison University on July 1st, 2012. Under his leadership, this public comprehensive university in Virginia with 22,000 students developed a bold new vision to be the national model of the engaged university, engaged with ideas and the world. A strategic plan focused on engaged learning, community engagement, and civic engagement. This plan has included the development of the ambitious new programs and initiatives across the institution, such as the Valley Scholars Program for the first-generation students from local public schools, James Madison Center for Civic Engagement, which provides national as well as institutional leadership, the Madison Trust to provide philanthropic support for innovative projects, and the Engagement Fellows, a public service year program for recent college graduates, among many others. President Alger has also led the James Madison Universities through a multi-year process focused on best practices with regards to diversity, inclusivity, and access to students, faculty, and staff. James Madison University has grown significantly under President Alger's leadership and recently surpassed the goal of $200 million comprehensive Unleashed fundraising campaign over 15 months early. In this episode, President Jonathan Alger and I will be discussing how higher education is changing and should change. We'll talk about his experience and initiatives that are coming through navigating the pandemic and what leaders of colleges and universities can do now in the light of the changing higher education environment. All right, let's begin the episode. Hello and welcome to Education and Empowerment Podcast. This is your host, Bakhtiyor Isoev, and this afternoon I'm very honored to be speaking with someone I admire very much, the president of James Madison University, John Alger. So without further ado, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much, Bakhtiyor. It's great to be with you.
That's amazing. I wanted to get us started by any favorite quote that you have.
Yes, well, I have a couple of favorite quotes that I live by in my role as president of James Madison University. And of course, being at the university named for the father of the U.S. Constitution, one of them has to be a Madison quote, right? There's a quote of Madison's from a letter that he wrote to a friend that is actually inscribed in a tunnel on our campus that says, "Knowledge will forever govern ignorance." And I really like that quote because he was talking here about the importance of education in a democratic society and the importance of education to a healthy democracy. And to me, that really speaks to our mission as an educational institution, that facts and evidence and research matter. Now, some people might say that quote is optimistic these days, to say knowledge will forever govern ignorance at a time when there's so much disinformation and people don't even trust facts. But I do think that it's an important pointer to the purpose of education. And the second one is a very simple quote that I have framed in my office and that I've always spoke about with students when they first come into JMU and when they graduate. And that is to dream big. Because to me, that very simple phrase goes to the heart of education. We're all about helping people to envision what's possible with their lives and then to help them develop to their full potential. So I always talk with students about the importance of dreaming big when they're in about what they can do with their education.
That's amazing. I'm glad you mentioned that because, I'm so curious to hear what's your story into higher education. What big dreams did you have coming into higher education in the first place?
Well, I certainly didn't have my career planned out as a child or a young adult even. I've always loved education and I was always interested in going to law school. And I never really connected the dots until I was out working as a lawyer in Washington, D.C., working at a big international law firm. And one day I saw a job ad at the U.S. Department of Education
Mm,
for lawyers. And who knew that the Department
right.
of Education actually had lawyers that worked in that field? So I applied. Long story short, I got the job in the Office for Civil Rights, at the U.S. Department of Education, and had the opportunity to work with colleges and universities across the country on important policy issues. And that's when I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life and career working in the field of higher education. I'd had mentors along the way in college and in law school, for example, Professor David Westfall at Harvard, who'd all
Mm,
encouraged me to think about going into the field of education. But I was determined. I wanted to practice law and see what that was all about.
right.
And so finding ways to combine those interests, that was really important to me. And I did that at the Department of Education, ended up working in-house at the University of Michigan and at Rutgers, and then finally ended up becoming a university president. So not exactly a straight line to a college presidency, but certainly education is something I've always had a passion for. And I'm just thrilled and delighted at how things worked out.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I guess, for all of us, as long as we have big dreams, we don't know where they will take us, but they can take us, any direction. I'd be curious to learn a little bit more about, how you ended up at James Madison University. And if you could tell us a little bit more about the work that you do there and what's kind of your day to day.
Sure. Well, as I said, I wasn't planning on becoming a university president, but as I got more and more involved in administration and higher education, I realized just how important it was to have leaders who care deeply about the mission of higher education. And that legal training turned out to be really valuable in understanding the major challenges that we face and problem solving and in learning how to work with people with different backgrounds. And so when the job came open at James Madison University, I had lived in Virginia for a number of years earlier in my career. My wife and I were familiar with the area, and I was really intrigued by the fact that this was a university named for the father of the Constitution. I wanted that to mean something in coming to James Madison University, that we would focus not just on preparing students for careers, but also preparing them for life as engaged citizens. So I was really excited about the opportunity. I think JMU is a truly remarkable institution with its focus on engagement with what we call ideas and the world. So, when I think about my job as president, no 2 days are alike. The job really, of course, first and foremost, you serve as the face and the voice of the institution with many different constituencies, both on campus and off campus, right? So you've got students, faculty, and staff, parents, alumni, donors, policymakers, community members, lots and lots of different audiences and groups that you work with and interact with. And so as a president, you've got to be nimble. You've got to do a lot of juggling because in any given day, you'll be encountering a lot of different issues and problems. Nothing comes to my desk typically unless it's a fairly difficult or complex problem. So you've got to have a lot of experts and smart people around you to help you work through challenges. And that's the nature of higher education. The good thing is you've got a lot of really smart people to work with. And that's something that I love about this environment is having so many intelligent, interesting people to work with. And I would just, also say that the variety of issues is exciting and it keeps you learning as a college president, whether it's governance, finances, student life, enrollment, diversity and equity, academic freedom, athletics, fundraising, so many issues that you deal with it. And that to me is exciting and energizing as a president.
That's amazing. I've been talking to so many presidents and leaders, for the past 6 months, and I'm getting, so much energy and inspiration by the work that, presidents like yours are doing. I mean, in general, running a higher education isn't easy, let alone how, the pandemic challenged everyone and everything, and running higher education institution became, much more complex. And I know that, 2020 and part of 2021 has been very transformational for higher education in general. And knowing that, traditionally higher education wasn't open for, change, it did change a lot. And I think the discussion we have today about, the change in higher education is very important. So I was hoping that you can help us make sense of some of the observations or the changes you have noticed as a president at James Madison University, as well as in the field of higher education in general.
Well, I think your point is an important one about this last year and a half as we've gone through the pandemic, because higher education is often said to be slow to change. And certainly some of that is true. We have a lot of traditions. We've been around for a long time. James Madison University was founded in 1908. I previously worked at a university which was founded before the United States became a country. So colleges and universities have been around for a long time, and we hope will be around for a long time in the future. But having said that, we moved a lot faster than anybody would have thought possible over this past year and a half. That pivot that we all went through when the pandemic hit to online courses and services happened very quickly. And the faculty across the entirety of the university, within a week or two, were able to transform their courses into being totally online. And I think this was an example that we are living, evolving organisms as institutions. You think about new fields of study that are constantly being introduced, things like cybersecurity, data analytics. We have new ways of teaching and learning, new innovations that are constantly being introduced. So the technology for us, really is a set of tools that we are constantly looking to improve what we do. When I think about the pace of change and the type of change over the last year and a half, and what we've been through in recent years with the internet and technology, certainly one of the good things is that content and information have been made much more widely accessible. That's also a challenge though, right? Because it means you don't need to go to school just to look stuff up, because you
Right.
can look it up on your iPhone.
Right.
But it does mean that our mission becomes much more about making sense of it all. And so a skill like data fluency or information literacy becomes extremely important as you're flooded with information. But how do you make sense of it? What's real, what's not, what's reliable, and what's not? And during a time like this, we see that the students, who of course are digital natives now, in Gen Z, that come to us, they expect everything to be available on demand, right? Just like television shows, they want them available when and where they're ready. And so you've got to think about how you provide services and courses without the traditional constraints of time and space. And we also simultaneously are serving much different and more diverse audience students, first generation students, students of all different ages and socioeconomic backgrounds and different stages of life. And I think that's a great opportunity for higher education, but it also means that we have got to think creatively about how we serve all of those different constituencies that we work with. Last couple things I'd say though is that the role of universities in our society is that we have to help balance the past, present, and the future, because we are repositories of the wisdom of the past, if you will, that we want to share and impart with the next generations, but we're also busy with research, developing information and knowledge for the future. And so there's that constant balancing act that you see in universities. And the last thing I would say is, even with all the technology, with the great things that we've been able to do and provide courses in an asynchronous manner to people all over the country and even all over the world, that still at its heart, education is about relationships and about human beings interacting with each other. That's how you get inspired. That's how you really learn. It's a group activity at the end of the day. Education is really not done well in isolation. And I think that's That's something that we always talk about at the university is the importance of human relationships, that spark that comes with great mentoring and great teaching and the impact that you can have on someone's life.
That's really phenomenal. I mean, I really find it inspirational for a few reasons. I myself embrace so much about, group learning, and obviously we're not going to go into the types of learning, but for ages and history, I mean, it was proven that learning happens in group settings. And I think you highlighted that very, very, on spot, that it's about those relationships that happen. And when those relationships happen, learning happens. And I think the new notion that I was really intrigued by, reading a book chapter that I actually wrote about, post-pandemic learning. You mentioned something very interesting, which was the GMU's, motto of being the change. I was hoping that you can help us make sense of what you meant by, being the change, and how do you see that happening in the framework of this innovation and the constantly changing environment? What does that mean? How do we embrace change?
Well, I think, first of all, to your point, when you think about education and when you think about the big problems that our society faces, no one person and not even one academic background is going to solve these problems alone, whether you're talking about hunger or economic disparities or climate change. These are big issues that require different people with different skills, mindsets, experiences to come together and work together. And you notice that phrase that we use is being the change, right? Because it's active. Now,
Right.
coming to us now want to make a difference in the world. They want to use their education for a purpose that goes beyond themselves, but often they don't quite know how to do that. What would that look like? And so part of our role is to give them the tools and the mindset that help them to develop that sense of agency, how they can use their education then to make a positive difference, no matter what field of study they might go into. Part of that is helping students to develop that sort of creative spirit and learn to see problems from different lenses and different academic disciplines. And that's how you start to see the connections, I think, between different fields of study. And that allows you to think about how you solve problems creatively and how to work with people from different backgrounds to address, major complex issues. One of the ways we do that in real life and in real time in higher education is what we call experiential learning. It's hands-on and it's active, right? Not just sitting in class, listening to a lecture, or taking notes, but these are experiences like community service learning or internships or undergraduate research that we offer here at James Madison University, that those are the experiences that really prepare students to be that change that they want to see in the world. And that also means trial and error. It means experimentation. It means not everything is going to work. And there's value in having that kind of learning experience where you get your hands dirty and where there's not necessarily a right answer in the back of the textbook. But I think that's what students are looking for. And I think that's what our society needs, is for them to develop those skills and that kind of mindset as we go forward.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And, as I'm listening to you, I'm starting to wonder if, you've seen, talking to other, college and university presidents, are they seeing the same thing? Is it like very unique to this, very moment? How are leaders taking advantage of this opportunities that pandemic is presenting?
Well, certainly the challenges that we face right now are huge and significant, and most of us have never seen anything quite like it in our lifetimes. But having said that, we are always faced with the challenges of the day. Higher education is sort of a microcosm of society, right? We're being a president of a university is sort of like being mayor of a community. If people are living together, they're working together and
Right.
together. So you reflect those larger changes that are happening in society. So when I think about the opportunities right now and what I hear from my colleagues, particularly with the pandemic and what it's done, it's caused all of us to experiment with teaching methods and business practices. Right now, we all had online courses and programs to some extent, but of course, this turbocharged those efforts across higher education. It caused us to interact in new and different ways, not just on campus, but with colleagues across campuses and across the country and across the world. We cut down on a lot of travel. We were having conferences on, interacting with global counterparts online. We had people working together on interdisciplinary teams. We had virtual collaborations. I think about students who weren't able to study abroad, but ended
Right.
up internships globally with global partners. We're in different time zones and with doing that without even leaving their own home. So it did cause a lot of experimentation, and not everything worked perfectly. I think, we've all learned and have the scars to the technology didn't go as well as planned, but I think it sort of re-energized all of us to recognize that we need to be humble enough to keep learning and to know that there's always going to be something new that's going to hit us that we're not going to be fully prepared for. But the beauty of higher ed is that we keep on learning and we do it together.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned this, as I'm kind of exploring this, whole notion of change and innovation. I wonder if, on a bigger scale, let alone, the humanity, but just, higher education itself. I mean, are we ready for another pandemic?
Well, let's hope we don't have another one anytime
Yes.
soon. But I think it's an important question, right? Because I think we've all seen how incredibly disruptive something like this can be. And frankly, in a world that's increasingly interconnected globally, I think, unfortunately, the reality is that it's very possible we could face something like this again, or maybe another type of crisis that would quickly spread, not just around the country, but around the world. So, we've got to think about being flexible and
Right.
as we go forward, right? And, for us, that means many different things in higher ed. It means, in terms of flexibility, part of it is providing credentials of different kinds, not just
Right.
traditional 2 and 4 year degrees, but recognizing competency and learning in that way, not just what we call seat time, how much time you've spent in a classroom, but
True.
recognizing and building on what people have learned and what they can show us that they've learned. It means we probably have to spend more time and effort thinking about technology support, rather than just bricks and mortar at our institutions as we go forward. And when I think about the pandemic, who knew as a college president that you'd be relying so heavily on your public health experts? So, one of the things I've learned is that there are going to be different types of experts that we are going to need more and more in higher education, as well as in society in general, to work with us and advise us. And again, it gets back to that humility as a lifelong learner. With the pandemic, I had to learn a whole lot about how viruses spread and what we can do to prevent them in the kind of setting that we have on a college campus. And so it just points out the fact that you need many different kinds of experts and expertise to run a complex institution like this. But in turn, as we learn from and with each other, hopefully we will inform our society about what we've learned and what works as well.
That's great. That's great. So along the lines of, what works and, where the industry is moving, can you help our listeners spot maybe some of the challenges or obstacles that you see that are, sort of preventing us from succeeding in higher ed?
Yes, well, there are always, of course, obstacles for any big organizations to change, right? And that's certainly true in higher education. And we have threats from within and threats from without. Within higher education, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of tradition, right? We tend to have certain patterns and ways of doing things that we have followed for decades, if not centuries, in some ways. And so some of those habits need to be re-examined. We've already talked about how we can use technology as a tool in new and different ways to allow us to teach in ways that reach people,
Right.
that overcome constraints of time and space. But we also have to look at some of the requirements that sometimes stand in the way. Sometimes there are regulatory requirements.
Hmm.
How many hours, you have to be in a classroom, how many books have to be in the library, accreditation standards
Well,
that probably need to be reviewed. But then we also have some other threats to higher education right now that are quite serious. There's a growing public distrust of institutions generally, and higher education is not immune from that. Colleges and universities used to be among the most trusted institutions in society. I'd like to think that we still are, but there are a lot of questions now, skepticism of expertise and facts and evidence, and and research. And that's all coupled with the extreme political polarization times that it's certainly played out in higher education, right? A lot of people accuse higher education of being a bastion of liberalism or of indoctrinating students in particular ways. And so we've got to be really thoughtful and careful about our role in society, about being nonpartisan, about welcoming people who have diverse backgrounds and perspectives, and allowing for that kind of public debate and discourse, and for the public to see that that's what can happen in higher education and can happen in productive ways that help people learn and grow and work together, and maybe even change their minds once in a while. What a concept, right? We don't talk about that very often in American society.
That's truly transformational. And, for the past, few months, I've been noticing that there are, many gatherings, and everyone is so eager to, transform the institution, bring efficiency, introduce tools, effectiveness. I mean, like new companies are coming up. There are a lot of, education executives and entrepreneurs that are ready to, take on new opportunities. What would you say, in your opinion, is the biggest area of opportunity right now that, fellow leaders and people who are in the education reform and people who are ready to change the way education happens? What would your suggestions be to them?
Well, I think there are some great opportunities right now. And a big part of it is that I think many of us in higher education are now embracing a model that is the opposite of the isolated ivory tower. People used to have this vision of colleges as being someplace where you'd go wearing a tweed jacket, smoking a pipe, and thinking great thoughts that were totally disconnected from the rest of the real world, right?
Right.
That is not what we are today. Instead, I think we are looking for all sorts of partnerships and collaborations with other colleges and universities, with businesses, with government, with other nonprofit types of organizations, and with the communities in which we're located. So there are a number of reasons for that. One is, first of all, that's how students learn, right? We talked about things like community service learning, where students learn by working on real world problems with partners and collaborators from outside the university. And certainly the same is true with things like internships and externships at companies and in government.
Right.
We want more and more students to have those opportunities. We have a lot of companies and organizations coming to us saying, these are the needs that we have. These are the skill sets we're looking for. We need your help. And so I think about a partnership like the one that we have here, with which expanded a facility nearby recently, working with us and with Blue Ridge Community College, where they said, we need people with new skill sets and people that understand biology and engineering and how some of these areas intersect. And so we talked to them and worked with them to think about the pipeline that would be helpful to them in the future. So I think there are some great opportunities for collaboration with industry, with government, to think about what are the big problems we're trying to solve today, what are the skill sets that we're trying to produce, and then how do you produce those skill sets that will prepare these students. They're going to be adaptable, because we know that, whatever job students get, that first job out of college is not going to be the only job. One of the things that we know about the students that are graduating now is they're going to have 7 or 8 or 9 different jobs in the course of their careers.
Right.
Those jobs haven't even been invented yet. So that's what we have to prepare them to do.
That definitely gives us a chance to explore our next question. But before we go to that, I think you mentioned about the importance of collaboration and partnership. I did have amazing podcast interviews with Michael Aiken and Dr. Andrew Flegel, the president CEO of the consortium, about the importance of that. So for our podcast listeners, make sure you also check out those episodes. But as we are thinking about, the future, and I think you noted correctly about this sort of the skepticism about the purpose of education and addressing, parents and the children or students who are, who have been accepted or in the process of considering, fall admission or next, spring admission. What advice would you give them? How can you make them assured that, their kids are in good hands and that they need this education today? What inspiration would you give them?
And that's such an important question, because one of the challenges we face right now, especially with the increasing costs of higher education, is this real question about the value proposition. People ask, is college worth it? Should I send my son or daughter to a 4-year institution and make that investment? And I think it is important to see it as a lifelong investment. Your education is something that nobody can take away.
Right.
And so I think, first of all, we have to think about it both for individuals, but also for society as an important investment. When I talk to parents and students, first of all, that are looking at college right now, one of the first things I tell them is, look, if you want to be prepared for a life of both meaning and purpose, as well as for a great career, there really is no substitute in my mind for higher education. And that includes, by the way, liberal arts and sciences. I think there's great value in students studying the classics and learning about a variety of different fields and disciplinary approaches that have been developed over the centuries. There's a lot of wisdom to be gained from, hearing about the past, hearing about scientific method, or about, great literature or social science research and what that has taught us. So I think sometimes people don't quite connect that learning to what they're going to be facing upmarket after they graduate, right? But I do think that those taught well, that all those different subjects can really give students those skills of critical thinking and communications, teamwork, leadership, problem solving. Those are the skill sets they are going to need going forward. And by the way, that all needs to be done in a setting that's becoming more and more diverse, right? So we also want students to learn how to work and interact with people from different backgrounds. And college provides a great opportunity for that. A lot of students come to us not necessarily having had as much of that experience, depending on their K-12 schools. So that's another important component, that we are communities that bring people together from all different backgrounds and walks of life that have to interact together, work together, and learn together. The other thing I would say to parents and students is, it's not just about learning subject matter content. That you should look at the learning opportunities in the classroom, but also outside the classroom, getting involved in student organizations and student life, taking advantage of the different student services and career services that we have to offer. That is part of the value of going to college, but you have to take the initiative. And I tell students, it's not like, high school where you just sit back and the teacher's going to tell you everything you need to know. This is a time to take the initiative, to get to know people, to go to office hours. The more you put in, the more you're going to get out of this experience. And so my advice also to students that are entering this fall, especially coming out of this pandemic that's been so isolating in so many ways, is to say to people, get involved, jump in with both feet, both in the classroom, but also outside the classroom. Get to know your fellow students, get to know the faculty and the staff. The people that work here are here because they care about you and they want you to succeed. But you need to take that initiative to reach out, to make the most of the experience. And I think the students that do that not only develop the skills and the mindset for success later in life, they learn things like time management. They learn how to overcome obstacles and overcome failure, and that's part of life, right? It shouldn't be easy. It shouldn't be simple or a straight line when you come to college. You are going to encounter circumstances and challenges that you haven't faced before. You're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have ideas and assumptions challenged, I hope, when you come to college and you hear different perspectives. But that's all part of this learning process. And it's going to help prepare you not just for a great career, but for a great life, where you can think about meaning and purpose and how you can use your education to make a difference while you're here on earth. And I always tell our students, the best thing you can do is to figure out how to use your skills and your knowledge to make a difference in the lives of other people. That's when you find your true self and your true calling, is when you think about how your skills and your education intersect with the needs of the world around you.
I can't agree more. This is so transformational and very, very empowering. I mean, as you're sharing this, I'm imagining myself, sitting in a row with other students and feeling like I've graduated. Thank you so much for this inspiration. And as we kind of wrap up, I was hoping that you can nominate another individual who might be a great guest speaker for our empowerment podcast. That'd be, great to hear.
Sure. Well, one name that immediately comes to mind is a friend and colleague of mine, Lynn Pasquarella, who is the president of the Association of American Colleges and Universities, AAC&U, in Washington, D.C. They are a national organization that works with colleges and universities of all kinds around the country with a focus on the importance and relevance of the liberal arts and sciences in the 21st century. So, they help colleges as well as businesses to see the connections between what we teach and how students learn and how we're preparing them for careers and for citizenship in the 21st century. And Lynn's a former college president herself from Mount Holyoke, a brilliant thinker and someone who sees those important connections in our society and is recognized not just around the country, but around the world as an expert on these issues.
That's amazing. That's great. And is there a, contact information or an email or a website that you'd like to refer our podcast listeners to?
Sure. So AAC, the Association of American Colleges and Universities, it's aacu.org. Is the organization, and there's a lot certainly on their website that include information about the importance and relevance, as I said, of liberal arts, but also of what employers are looking for.
Right.
ACNU's done a lot of research on that subject, and it turns out that it's very helpful when you start to have those connections and conversations between the business world and the world of education. So a lot of great research has been done there. There are a lot of great organizations in higher education. The American Council on Education, ACE, is another one that has done a lot of this work about the importance and relevance of higher education. And then the Association of Governing Boards is another one that works with governing boards of colleges and universities. That's agb.org.
Right.
They too have a lot of great resources about higher education and academic governance in particular.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing these resources. I mean, I do find them very useful. And, as we're wrapping up the episode, I do want to say that, years ago when I was getting myself involved in international education and higher education, I was so concerned about where the future was going. And as I'm experiencing this today myself, I do see that, leaders like you are so important in the field. And, thank you for being there to help, transition, higher education to a better version of it, as well as, making sure that the future of people who are in this country or beyond this country is in good hands with, leadership like yours and with institutions that you're running. So I'm very inspired. I hope our podcast listeners are as well. And, once again, on behalf of Education and Empowerment and fourstay, we thank you for your time and the insights and the inspiration that you provided. And until our next show, thank you so much.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Education and Empowerment Podcast. This show is brought to you by fourstay, a SaaS-enabled online booking marketplace for student and intern housing. fourstay provides turnkey, all-in-one cloud-based accommodation software solutions for colleges, universities, and organizations. Learn more at offcampus.fourstay.com and landlords.fourstay.com.